Marina, welcome to the Health Path podcast, and thank you for being patient with me. I think I've had to reschedule this 3 or 4 times, so we're finally here.
Well, fantastic, Alex. Thank you for inviting me. It was worth the wait because you're reaching very good audience. So I'm very excited to share my knowledge of FSM, which I picked up on the way as yet another treatment modality. So just want to start with introducing myself. So my name is Marina Townsley. I trained as a nutritional therapist and started working as such since 2008 in Northwest London in Hampstead originally. Then moved around in a couple of clinics. And then I also trained as a naturopath and studied herbal medicine, which is my big passion. I really love my herbs. But somewhere along the way, a lady came into my life who actually managed to save her mother's leg after a car crash with a treatment called FSM. So I was intrigued because her mother, who was in Poland at the time, basically the doctors said to her, the leg needs to be amputated, it's not healing, this wound is sort of festering, and she was down for an amputation, and her daughter went to America, trained in FSM very fast, bought the machine, flew back and saved her mother's leg. So when she shared this with me, I thought, wow, what's this treatment, if it can do something like that. And sure enough, the lady who resurrected this therapy, which is not, it's relatively new now because it's been kind of used again for 20 years, but it started back at the turn of the century in 1900s, where there were lots of research and scientific societies that studied electromagnetic therapies. And of course, somewhere in mid-20s, in America and then Europe, the medicine changed course somewhere. And they basically said pharmaceutical drugs and surgery are scientific methods. Anything else, if you practice those modalities, will retrieve your medical license. You won't be able to practice. So they shut down all electromagnetic therapy, actually the same nutrition, herbal therapy, all those homeopathy were frowned upon as kind of unproven, unscientific. Of course, all of them are making a comeback now because anything that works should be used in the interest of the patient. And how it works, of course, it takes time, it needs investment. But anyway, so what happens? The lady in the US called Dr. Carol McMakin, who is a chiropractor by training, how she chanced upon it. Basically, one of her colleagues bought a practice from an older naturopath who came from Holland in 1946 and practiced in that room. And when he sold the practice to him, he left behind this mysterious machine covered with the sheet sort of at the back of the room. And one day, this guy, George, sort of opened it and what is it? And started looking at it. And there was this parchment where there were numbers written down, and the numbers were in hertz, which is a measure of frequencies. So he understood it's some kind of electromagnetic device, and the list of frequencies said this one reduces inflammation, this is repairs a tear in the tissue, and they basically started with that. So Carol herself had an accident during skiing where she damaged her shoulder, and for 6 months she was working on that shoulder, treating it with osteopathy, the chiropractic, all the methods she knew, and still the range of motion wasn't full enough. And her colleague George said, well, let's use this machine, what have we got to lose? And he plugged her in this machine, and after 15 minutes, her shoulder worked. And then her jaw dropped, and she thought, what is this? And being very curious lady, for which we're very grateful because we have FSM now, she took it further, developed it. A lot of her followers, they are trained doctors, so they got involved. And actually, it's quite big in America, in Germany, in Australia. She trained a lot of people who use it in their practices. And in the States, a lot of GPs, mainstream medical doctors, they have FSM machines, which they use as a matter of course now. And there is a big interest in this therapy. But she basically resurrected it, and a lot of her followers, they discovered new frequencies, what they do, so that original list grew and grew. Some frequencies are still experimental, others have been proven. And what I am excited about, they've done several studies now. They were perhaps medium scale, involving 30 to 50, 60 patients. But what these studies shown that the results are reproducible. So the frequencies, they won't do one thing in one case and something else in another case. They do exactly what they're meant to do. For example, frequency of 40 hertz will always reduce inflammation, and frequency of 13 hertz will always dissolve scar tissue, adhesions, sort of non-living stuck things. So it's very good for us as clinicians, because we now have studies to fall back onto and say, that this is scientific, or at least it's in the process of being researched and looked into. So how does it look in practice? Well, after I trained with Carol, she came to London in 2018. So actually the clinic where I work, Sutherland House, we all went and trained in frequency-specific microcurrent then. And a couple of years later, I flew to Italy, to Tuscany, to train to an advanced level with her. So because, like every therapy, the sum of knowledge, the bank of knowledge is not stationary, it develops all the time. So I wanted to keep up with it. So at that point, I bought 4 of these little machines that sort of have a button to turn them on. And there are 2 channels. Basically, you can program them for what you want to do. And there are programs like, if you injured your lower back and it's a slip disc, you can choose a program, acute disc, or if it dragged on for months, like chronic disc problem, you can treat your like very physical, very real problem, sciatica, and you pull the muscle in your neck, or it can be something more subtle. Recently, I started using these with people, for example, with mold exposure, and that's a new area. We're just beginning to understand how mold toxicity affects every organ system, and you can actually use this as a adjunct therapy. You, of course, need to do all the normal things through nutritional therapy and herbal therapy and other things, but this allows, in my experience, allows us as clinicians to get to those sort of awkward places that are not easily accessible. For example, nerves. How would you treat nerve pain, or something which is not even clearly understood, like fibromyalgia, when somebody has full body pain? And what do you do about it? So it's interesting that Carol had some trials with fibromyalgia, subset of fibromyalgia patients whose trouble started after a head or neck injury, or back injury, basically involving spinal cord, which of course comes from the neck, runs along the spine. So that type of fibromyalgia is very successfully treated, and that's about 40% of those patients. Very successfully treated because we can work directly on the spinal cord. It responds. So this machine works, as I mentioned, on a pair of frequencies. So channel number 1, basically we use a frequency that corresponds to some pathological state. It can be inflammation, it can be toxicity, it can be calcification, hardening. So anything that's abnormal, there is a frequency for it. Paralysis or any other state that we want to reverse. And the channel number 2, we choose, we need to diagnose the problem correctly. So we decide what tissues are involved. Is it the disc? Is it the spinal cord? Is it kidney? Is it heart, lung, some area of the brain? So, or lining, let's say mucosal lining. So we choose a frequency for that. And we run them in parallel. So let's say inflammation on spinal cord, that would be 40 hertz running on the frequency for the condition, and 10 hertz will be running for the spinal cord, for the target tissue or organ. And after 10 minutes, an hour, however long it takes, normally these programs are an hour. Some are shorter, some are longer. If the frequency is correct, if our diagnosis is correct, and that's the problem, in an hour you have the patients saying, the pain's gone, or it's reduced from like 9 out of 10 to 2 out of 10. So you have that very dramatic improvement, which nothing else can achieve. Of course, you can take painkillers, which have their own kind of side effects. For a lot of painkillers are constipating, for example. That's a known side effect, or they can be addictive. Others, they will work, but they will take an hour or two. This can take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and you put a person who is in pain and very uncomfortable in a more relaxed state where you can actually address other things. So that blew my mind. I thought, this is worth knowing. I'm going to train in it. And you think, okay, well, how many therapies am I going to add? But this is something you can't miss, because it allows to go very deep into the sort of root of the problem. Because we often think of ourselves, of course, we are biochemical beings. We take drugs, medications, we take herbs, we eat, even coffee, lots of substances affect us chemically. But if we look behind the curtain, sort of behind the scenes, everything comes down to molecules and atoms and subatomic particles. They all together have bonds and they vibrate. So nothing solid that we see in the world is really solid. There are subtle vibrations, and certain conditions, they respond to vibrations that we tell them with FSM. So how does it actually work? It's a good question, because there are a couple of working theories. Because obviously, to study it properly, lots of money needs to be invested, and certain institutions, they want kind of university-sponsored trials, and there are issues there. But it's work in progress. But as we understand currently the mechanism of action, so basically every cell in the body is covered with receptors, and they are sitting there sort of like antenna sticking out from the surface of every cell. And there are not one or two, there are dozens, thousands, millions of those. Some receptors are for paracetamol, some for insulin, some for caffeine, some for hormones and neurotransmitters, and each receptor has a particular shape. So the current understanding of what FSM does, it's so basically with years of some condition or pathology, the receptor can kind of change its shape and be stuck in that form. So when the current resonates at the frequency that corresponds to that tissue, you can correct it, and then you can affect the receptor. So you can affect it with the frequency. The only analogy that comes to mind that sort of more or less sort of illustrates what's happening is when you open your car, you can put the key in and open the car, and that would be let's say paracetamol landing on the receptor. And then what happens, the whole chain of events, it sort of affects kinases, which then talk to messenger RNA, which then talk to microRNA that produces anti-inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory prostaglandins that reduce the pain. So the message is like the key put in the lock. It unlocks the lock, and then the command goes through those kinases, mRNA, microRNA, to start anti-inflammatory action in that cell or that target tissue or organ. So when we are using frequency-specific microcurrent, it's more like a remote fob key. It still opens the lock, but it does it through a different mechanism. So it corrects the receptor if it's been affected by years of chronic illness, and then it sort of sends the signal to start normalizing the tissue. So what we think is happening is basically, if there is, let's say, I specialize in gastrointestinal diseases. Somebody has endometriosis or SIBO, or they had ruptured appendix and the surgery. So there will be adhesions, things will be stuck to each other as a result of that inflammation that happened. So by using 13 hertz on that tissue, let's say, I don't know, nerve stuck to the ovary, and the person says, I have excruciating pain, in this area, or sigmoid is stuck to the peritoneum. You need to dissolve that adhesion. So we'll use 13 hertz, and the second channel will be that target tissue, the frequency for peritoneum or nerve or the ovary, whatever we are attempting to treat. If the frequency is incorrect, it just won't do anything. So we know, okay, that's the wrong kind of stab in the dark. We need to diagnose more precisely. That's where when people come, I tell them, please send me your blood tests, your scan results, your x-rays, anything you have. Because before they even come, I have to sit down and analyze what's going on and decide what frequencies I'm going to use. So it's not kind of random, it's all very, very specific, which gave the name to the therapy. It's frequency specific. It's specific to the tissue, first of all. For example, if you had, let's say, hamstring injury and it's really hurting, and you think, okay, it's my tendon, I need to use frequency 191 for the tendon, and you're running inflammation on the tendon or tendon repair for days, and nothing happens. you think again, what else is there next to the tendon? Maybe it's a bursa, that sac filled with fluid, that 195 hertz. It's only 4 hertz difference. The tendon is 191, the bursa is 195. But if you run inflammation on the bursa and feel a relief, then you know you are treating the correct tissue and you've chosen the correct frequency. That's why it's specific. It's specific to the tissue. It's specific to the condition. What's wrong with that tissue? So yeah, it's all very exciting because it suddenly allowed me to help people I couldn't help before. So of course I give them dietary advice. Of course I send them recipes and completely change the way they eat. I give them good stuff, our supplements that we use that are appropriate for their condition. I use my herbs. I even sometimes frustrated with what I can't find on the market. I make my own potions or capsules, my own formulations. I do use all that, but there are situations where you need to go really deep to the cause of the condition that appears to be complex, as I say, like fibromyalgia, like autism. I had this extraordinary case where a 21-year-old boy, young man, was brought by his parents. He was non-verbal. He was damaged it was a vaccine damage actually. He was 1 when he had MMR, and after that his development reversed. He lost speech. So this 21-year-old man was non-verbal and very excitable and was waking up at 5 in the morning, obviously disturbing the whole family, and they couldn't get enough sleep. They were exhausted. So they saw a podcast of another parent of somebody with autism and decided give it a go. Obviously, I couldn't say to them, "Oh, we'll treat him and he'll start speaking," because the damage was too severe and too early on in life. But what we managed to do, we managed to help him sleep. He would get at 8 or 9 in the morning instead of 5. He stopped bedwetting and he became calmer and more responsive. So there was progress in a quite a desperate situation, not to say that we healed him, but we made the life of his family bearable enough for him to kind of fit into the family in a better way with his condition. So that was one situation. Then I had another quite an interesting case. I think, Alex, I mentioned it before. I'm going to repeat myself here because it was so extraordinary. So it was a 17-year-old girl from the north of England. I was contacted by her mother, who found me on the FSM list of practitioners and asked, could you possibly come and treat my daughter? She is in hospital, it's NHS hospital, who actually were very resistant to my visits because they never heard of FSM. And yeah, it was just weird to them that, she is in hospital where all treatments are available. But what happened to this girl? She was in a car crash where she broken her spine, her arms, her legs, almost every bone in her body. And they very successfully pinned her together. So she started healing. But what happened in the process? They had to do a later operation on her aorta. And after that, her bowel motion stopped. She just couldn't open her bowels at all. So she was fed intravenously. By the time I went to see her for 3 months, she was on a drip fed and parenteral nutrition. Her mother's hope was that after she researched FSM, looked into it, read the book, heard some podcasts. She said, could we possibly just move her bowels to avoid another operation? Because by that time, the girl was moved onto a gastrointestinal ward, and they said, we're just going to open her up, see what's going on. We think it's obstruction. But something the mother said, oh, she has gurgling sounds, she sometimes, the flatulence is there. I thought, is it obstruction? That doesn't quite sound, could be partial, but they were adamant they didn't want another operation, more scar tissue, more anesthetic, more trauma. So I said, I can't guarantee the outcome, but I'm mad enough to give it a go. It was, quite a difficult case. A lot of practitioners wouldn't want to touch it. But I said, okay, I'll come as long as you understand there is no promise that will, achieve what we want to achieve. I'll just give it a go. And what I did for 6 to 8 hours a day for 3 days solidly, I worked running 4 of these machines on her. Everything I could think of, from trauma, rebalancing her central nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, and mainly working on the vagus nerve, because my working theory was they somehow severed some innervation to the gut. The gut is not moving because it's kind of stunned in that concussed, paralyzed state, but it's not paralytic ileum as such, because I'm sure we can bring it back to life. So that was my hope. And I was working mainly on the vagus nerve and on abdominal adhesions, because I reasoned that after many operations, there'll be lots of scar tissue. And on emotional side as well, because the girl was tearful, fed up, just wanting to leave hospital and go home. And they wouldn't discharge her till her bowels started moving, till she started walking. So after 3 days of this intense treatment, she started eating, she started passing, opening her bowels. And the guy who was in charge of her parenteral nutrition came and he adjusted it, and they cut it by half, even when I was there. By the time I left and sort of we kept in touch, I knew that a week later, she's come off the drip, she was eating. And another week later, they discharged her home. So my work was done. And I was, very happy that that was the outcome of that case. But there were quite a few other interesting stories. For example, from my own practice, I had a retired solicitor who worked very hard in a very hostile, very stressful environment all his life, very competitive. And he was a gentle person. So, by the time he came to me, he was retired and he wasn't working. There was no stress. And actually, we were working on a completely different health issue. But he mentioned that I have these nightmares and I have the same dream that this animal comes out of the woods and attacks me. And I scream and I wake up my wife, and it's sort of very disturbed, kind of unsatisfactory sleep, which is not quality sleep, it's not deep sleep, he's not rested. So it didn't help with his other problem that he originally came with to me. And I started thinking to myself, I don't know, I somehow got the feeling that because of his gentle manner and his character, he probably was bullied at work all his life. And when I started quizzing him about it, he said, yeah, and I, don't miss it at all, So they were, it was too much for him. And I started using every time, working on the original, very physical problem. but also running PTSD program on him every time he came in parallel. And after about 4 or 5 sessions of that, his dreams stopped and he started sleeping through the night. He's still very anxious kind of guy. It's his natural disposition. So, but we resolved something that he didn't even seek to resolve. He just mentioned it in passing. And I thought, is it something? Because I like a challenge. I am mad. I do take on strange and weird cases that no one wants to treat because, it's hard to understand what's going on. But I like a challenge, and because it also refines your thinking, how you look at diagnosis, and it's satisfying if you can resolve it. So I'm not claiming that I can help everybody who comes through the door, but if I can help 7 people out of 10, I'll be happy with that. To me, it's a good rate. So was there something else? Yes, there was another lady. She was a professional dentist. You can imagine sitting sort of looking in people's mouths in a certain position, kind of drilling and doing things dentists do. But she, a young woman in her early 30s, she had only one UTI in her whole life. And after that UTI, she developed urinary urgency. She would just need to run to the loo every so often. And when you're treating somebody, you can't stop the treatment and run to the loo. It was wrecking her professional life because she was trained in some highly skilled, very specific area of dentistry. And she just couldn't leave, whenever she needed to run to the loo. And she actually was getting depressed because she liked trekking and walking with friends. She liked getting out and about. She started thinking like an elderly 70-year-old. Where's the loo in the vicinity, or where I'm going? I have to plan my route so I can go to the loo. And it was just depressing her. And she obviously went to the doctor, and then the specialist said to her, well, you have to go on this medication for overactive bladder. And she thought, I'm 32. I mean, I shouldn't have overactive bladder. And what happened here anyway? So in desperation, she also, heard about FSM and said, "Look, can we do something with this?" And of course, I excluded all the irritant foods from her diet. I said, "How anxious you are? Is there, a lot going on, in your life?" So we sort of treated her adrenals. Her adrenals were actually, her adrenals were in a hyper, a fight or flight response, but in that first stage when you overproduce cortisol and everything kind of is like exaggerated response. So we worked on all that. We also did a functional medicine test to look at her microbiome because I thought, okay, there could be, if food is not the irritant, it could be the microbiome, something there. And sure, we found a couple of things that we were working on, and they were not your typical E. coli either, that creates UTI situation. So we treated that herbally. And we got better, like 70%, but not quite to the end. And then I said, well, let's try, can't hurt, may help. Let's just give it a go. And I worked on her, genitourinary system, and also on the urinary sphincter. And after couple of sessions, she said, yes, I can see that, I can hold it now. She was so happy that she could go like for a few hours without running to the loo. with her, it wasn't the pain. It wasn't, even how much she passed, because she passed very small amounts. It was the urgency, and we managed to crack that urgency with this. So, and so I use it then as an adjunctive therapy. I don't push it on people. I don't say you have to have FSM. If they come and they already know about it's a help, and I say great, so I don't have to explain to you what it does, because it can sound a bit, it's in the area of energetic medicine. And 10 years ago, I would be very skeptical myself, thinking, what is it? We are physical beings. I don't want to go on sort of cloud cuckoo land into energy, and, how much do we know about it? But now I'm very confident that it exerts very physical, very real effects on the body, and it can help the mind. With somebody who is suffering from PTSD years after he left his job and retired and travels and enjoys life, but still has nightmares about it, and maybe not even directly connected. It's sort of veiled, and you have to kind of guess what it is. And it worked. And I'm thinking, yeah, I would use it, wherever I am stuck. If it's a difficult case, I will give FSM a chance to work its magic, because it's as much an art form as it is a science. So it's interesting how Carol over the years actually changed the way she trains people, changed her training workshops, because she used to teach frequencies, which frequency does what. And now we have a list of them. We have a list even on the phone. There is an application if I want to look up, I don't know, heart or lung or urinary sphincter or whatever, or esophageal sphincter, I can look it up. So I don't need to memorize them anymore. It's more conceptual thinking, what goes wrong, what set it off. So the history taking is very important to understand, what happened to the person, and the sequence of events, what their antecedents and triggers were, and how we approach it, what tissues, what organs are involved. For example, as I said, I specialize in gastrointestinal diseases. So I see people lots with IBS, SIBO, IBD, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, those kind of things, digestive disorders of various kinds. But for example, a lot of, if anyone comes to you and says, I have acid reflux and burping, anything that sort of goes this way, upwards, when it should go downwards, I immediately think H. pylori. Quite often people are undiagnosed. I can treat H. pylori, and often do. I have my protocol with a couple of supplements that target just H. pylori. They don't destroy microbiome because they are very, very specific to that bug. They don't affect your lactobacillus, your bifidobacteria, all your good guys that defend you from infections. Because the standard treatment for H. pylori is triple antibiotic therapy. There's a couple of problems with that. Firstly, it's like a nuclear bomb on your system. It just sterilizes your whole gut. And then 2 weeks later, whatever comes along takes hold, and people have one infection after the other. And it, like a cycle of antibiotic taking starts. And, in the end, the bugs develop resistance and they don't even work. So it's a dangerous, yes, you can do it a couple of times in life, but if it becomes a cycle, it's very important to break that cycle. So obviously, the herbal alternatives that I use for H. pylori treatment and a very specific probiotic that binds it are much more preferred course of action because they only target H. pylori. But also there is a frequency for H. pylori. So while people are sitting with me chatting in the follow-up. I plug them in and they sit there and we talk about everything under the sun, but they are getting an extra layer of treatment with this because there are frequencies for bugs and viruses. There's people with, let's say, chronic fatigue syndrome, which is always a bit of a medical mystery because it can be triggered by a number of things. Well, one of most common triggers is, oh, I had mononucleosis as a teenager or in my university years and was quite ill with it, but then got better. And then years later, I got, chronic fatigue and crashed. And, Epstein-Barr virus is a big, big trigger for chronic fatigue. And there is a frequency for Epstein-Barr virus, which we can, try and what we think happens is it's just dismantled, it's just broken. So we want to resonate that virus at the frequency that destroys it. Like, for example, the 70% lead crystal glass will break if a singer hits a note, like opera singer, and sort of holds that note. The lead atoms will resonate with that frequency and the glass will shatter. It's like a good party trick. But, these things have a very real physical explanation. So when I suspect there are viruses involved, I more often than not will use FSM because they are tricky, because they can be killed like bacteria. They are not live. It's something between dead matter and kind of live organism. It's something that reproduces, but it's more like photocopying process. They just hijack your resources and they photocopy themselves. It's not live reproduction like it is with bacteria as we know it. So with any kind of viral infection underlying the condition that I am attempting to treat, I will think of FSM if there is obviously a frequency for that particular bug or virus. Because a lot of it, as I said, it's still work in progress. There are experimental frequencies discovered. For example, frequencies for mitochondria, because I started looking in mitochondrial support big time, because we're now having a population coming in with post-COVID syndromes, long COVID, people who just don't get well. And yeah, it's good to kind of back it up with other things. So I had this gentleman a year ago who just was doubting whether he'll be able to return to work after a bout of COVID, or was really, well, it just undermined his energy completely. He was just dragging his feet, not being able to do much. And what I discover quite often with those kind of patients, the virus itself is long gone. It's just wrought havoc on other body systems. And we just run some blood tests, look, what else can be going on. And with this particular patient, we discovered he's hypothyroid. His GP didn't pick it up. We discovered he has sleep apnea, so he doesn't get oxygenated in the night because his airways are constantly blocked, and he wakes up, and there are these moments through the nights when you stop breathing, and by the end of the night, in the morning, you're just not well oxygenated and you feel exhausted as if you haven't slept. So there was a bit of insulin resistance going on. So, I plugged my 4 of those, one working on oxygenation, one on thyroid, one on insulin resistance, and another one on mitochondria. So, I even wrote a program specifically for him, mitochondrial repair. And I thought we'll give it a go. And sure enough, gradually, after 4 months or so, he went back to work. And not only he went back to work, he could do like the full day. Now he works a couple of days from home and 3 days in the office. But, he's where he wants to be. He wasn't ready to retire. This fatigued state was crushing him, and he was demoralized because, you do want to go and be in the office with other people. After 2 years of COVID, hey, we all want to be with people again, and he was desperate for that. So that was another positive story. And the last one, I'm not going to talk probably more about this. This was an interesting case. This lady who, from the age of 2, had severe autoimmune disease, and she was covered in psoriasis that used to kind of go in remission and then come back with the vengeance. And all her life, she had these flare-ups. It would sort of retreat. So she was on quite severe biologic drugs, obviously under a consultant who specialized in autoimmunity. But she just wasn't satisfied with the status quo because those drugs all had side effects. And she said, is there another way? So I thought, yeah, we'll look at your diet, we'll look at your gut microbiome, and we can do something else. There is this therapy called frequency-specific microcurrent. We'll give it a go if need be. So we started with functional medicine testing. We discovered he is gluten intolerant, which doesn't come a surprise with autoimmune patients. And so we retweaked her diet. We found liquid probiotic for psoriasis. We worked a charm. We did lots of other work. But then she went to visit her relatives in Birmingham, and they had a celebration. And unbeknown to her, she consumed some gluten. And when she came, she was waiting in the waiting room of our clinic, and her body language was all like miserable. She was like, and I was thinking, you didn't look like that last week when I saw her. She was chatty and bouncy. And I said, what happened? She said, oh, I think I got gluten. I did try to be, disciplined, but somehow, food got cross-contaminated, and I had really bad reaction. And I said, come in, take your clothes off. We put wet, warm towels, on her shoulders, on her ankles, so we could run the current through the whole body. I clipped this machine. It has these crocodile clips. If we're using warm, wet towels, they act like a conductors, but you can do it a different way. There are these gel pads which can also be connected. So, but the towels allow sort of bigger area of the body to be worked on. So she lay on the couch and we plugged her in, and I just found what's the frequency for wheat, and we ran wheat frequency on her whole body. And by the end of the hour, she said, oh, my pain is gone, because she would get like body pains, muscle pains. And I'm thinking a lot of fibromyalgia is like that. It's muscle pain, but there is nothing wrong with your muscle. There is something else underlying this. So her muscle pains were triggered by gluten reaction. With some people, it's stress. Some people can be traumatized and have horrendous stress on top of that. So we start thinking upstream. So before I work, let's say, on IBS, we'll sort of look at the patient's history, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I need to calm down her midbrain. and work on her sympathetic, parasympathetic, rebalance that, work on the HPA axis to calm down the stress response. And once all of that is working again, then go and work on the gut. Because when okay, she comes with IBS presentation, if I just straight away work on the gut, quite often it won't work because there are other components to this. So this is what FSM does. So I highly advertise it and encourage people to try it out. Interesting thing is, because these kind of treatments, electromagnetic treatments, are gaining popularity, not just with people who heard something from a friend or heard a podcast or read about it online. They hear it from their consultants. Consultants in King's College are now, oh, we're producing this device to work on your vagus. Well, this already can work on the vagus, but they are kind of catching up with this idea you can do lots, and they are producing their own devices. A couple of devices are already in action, like people probably use TENS machines, the transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation device. It actually uses the mode of operation is completely different. As I explained, we have two channels on this machine, one for the tissue, one for the pathogenic state that we want to change for more normal state. TENS machines, they use firstly very much stronger current. This strength of this current, if you're well hydrated, you won't even feel anything. It will go like knife through butter, straight through your cells, through your tissues, and it runs at the same strength as your own nerve impulses. You normally don't feel, oh, my nerve impulses are sending messages to each other. We just don't, because it's all organic, it's all very low current. It's the same with this machine. With TENS machine, you do feel pins and needles, and it's going in because it's a stronger current. It's not physiological level like FSM. And it also just one channel. And the range of frequencies is much narrower. It's between 70 and 120 hertz. Well, this can go very low, like from 1 to 1,000. It's normally within that range of 1,000 hertz. The frequency for, let's say, human papilloma virus is 915 hertz. So at the kind of top end of the range of what FSM can do, but we're still catching those. So TENS machines, what they do, they basically jamming devices. They block messages from your peripheral nerve. Let's say you hurt your lower back and your nerve is being compressed by, let's say, by your sleep disc. It will jam the message from that peripheral nerve into the brain. That's all it does. It just stops the sensation of pain. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't, undo anything. With this, we can treat the disc. So it's just a completely different ballgame. PMF devices, it's a pulsed electromagnetic field. They work also on a very narrow band of frequencies from 5 to 30 hertz. And it's pulsed, it's brief, it's one channel. Again, it will do something. It will probably, similarly to TENS machine, it will help to interrupt the pain signal. But this is more therapeutic device for me. And yeah, what can I say? If you want to learn more about it, Carol McMakin wrote a book called Frequency Specific Microcurrent, which is available on Amazon. And it reads like a novel. It's not very thick, so you can, if you have a couple of, or even a week break and go on holiday, take it with you. It reads like a novel. It's about real lives, real stories, very interesting cases, and also lots of explanation, and you can get hooked on it. So, I read the book before I went to train, so I had some understanding how it works. But I think we are probably coming to the end of our time now. If you have any questions, please contact me directly, either through Alex. I'll be somewhere in his resources with this podcast, or directly through my website, marinatownsley.com. And there is an option to email me there as well, and the contact phone number. So very happy to answer any questions about how frequency-specific microcurrent works, what it can do, and what it can't do. So,
Marina, thank you so much. I think it's really fascinating to hear some of the cases as well, in regards to, I guess, the context and why people might be able, or how people might be able to reach out to you, and what sort of conditions might be most appropriate. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience. It's definitely something that I would like to learn more about. I have one super quick question, because you mentioned a couple of things that are very relevant for SIBO and gut health generally. Off the top of your head, is there a frequency for the ileocecal valve?
Yes.
There is.
Yes. It's 3 hertz. Wow. I even remember it because I use it very often, because that's one of the most frequent underlying causes for SIBO, when the valve doesn't close properly. Of course, you can go to a chiropractor, osteopath, they manipulate and then shut it, but sometimes it opens again. So yeah, I like using my FSM machines on my SIBO patients as well.
Good to know.
Marina,
thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. We'll put your links into the show notes so people will be able to reach out to you. And thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Alex. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to you and your audience.